Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down the big ideas shaping our world. Today, we're talking about a massive, sudden change in trade law that's put a $1.6 trillion relationship on a ticking clock. So we're going to explore the really creative solutions and the high-stakes strategies that are popping up to deal with it, strategies that will basically define North America's economic future. So what happens when a critical trade law just disappears overnight? I mean, really think about it. That's pretty much what just happened. A huge $1.6 trillion trade relationship is suddenly facing a deadline. And it's all because of this one unexpected legal shift that has sent companies and governments scrambling. Okay, so check out how fast this all went down. On February 20th, 2026, bam, the Supreme Court strikes down the government's go-to tariff tool. Just like that, it's gone. Within hours, literally hours, the administration pivots, pulling a dusty old law off the shelf. And that move kicks off a 150-day countdown. Now here's the kicker. That countdown is set to collide directly with the huge high-stakes review of the entire North American trade deal this July. So you see how this rapid-fire sequence of events just created this massive shockwave? We went from an open-ended system to a very temporary and, honestly, very shaky patch. All right, so this is where it gets really interesting. This whole situation creates what we're calling the 150-day problem. So what is this new system? And why is that 150-day clock causing such a massive headache for pretty much everyone? Well, they dusted off something called Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974. I mean, we're talking about a tool from a completely different era. It was designed to fix what they called fundamental international payments problems. You know, big trade deficits back when the global economy worked very differently. It was absolutely not designed for the super complex, just-in-time supply chains that run the world today. And here's why that matters so much. If you look at the old system versus the new one, it's night and day. The old tariffs were based on a national emergency, so they could last, well, forever. No end date. But this new system, Section 122, it's got really strict limits. It's capped at a 15% tariff, and more importantly, it has a hard stop at 150 days. That deadline is the real killer here. It creates this huge cloud of uncertainty for any business trying to plan, more than 5 months ahead. And just to put this in perspective, we are not talking about a small corner of the economy. We're talking about $1.6 trillion. That's the value of trade between the US, Canada, and Mexico. It's nearly a third of all US trade. And now that entire relationship is operating in this brand new, super uncertain environment. So with that backdrop, you have to wonder, right? How does a huge policy shock like this actually affect real companies on the ground? What are they doing to react? This has led to what's being called the corporate survival playbook. And this quote from an expert at Kahoot.ai just nails it. They said, "This is no longer a finance-only problem. It is an operating system problem." And that really gets to the heart of it. Tariffs aren't just a number you plug into a spreadsheet anymore. They're a live, moving part of your day-to-day business that you have to constantly manage. So to survive, companies are getting absolutely laser-focused on a number called the landed cost. Now, what is that? It's basically the total cost to get a product to a customer's door. We're talking price, shipping, insurance, duties, everything. And you have to know this number because a surprise 15% tariff can literally erase your entire profit margin on an item overnight if you're not careful. So what does this survival playbook actually look like in practice? Well, smart e-commerce brands are rolling out a 5-step plan. Step 1, they're rebuilding their cost data for every single product they sell, what's known as a SKU. Step 2 is pretty cool. They're setting up variance bands. These are basically automatic alerts. If the cost of a product jumps by, say, 5%, it could automatically pause a promotion or adjust a price. Step 3, they're getting strategic about timing their shipments to navigate that 150-day tariff window. For 4, they're using AI and automation to squeeze every penny out of their shipping costs to help offset the tariffs. And finally, Step 5 is about mindset. Any potential refunds from the old tariffs, they're treating that like found money, an unexpected bonus, not something you build into your budget. Okay, so while businesses are busy scrambling and adapting on a tactical level, let's zoom out because there's a much bigger geopolitical chess game playing out. The 3 countries are now strategizing for the main event, the big review of the entire North American Trade Pact, the USMCA. And the US is coming to the table with a long list of demands. So what everyone thought would be a pretty routine, check the box kind of review has suddenly turned into a full-on renegotiation. And that has huge implications, especially for critical sectors like the auto industry. And when you look at what the US is asking for, it's pretty extensive. They want tighter rules of origin, basically stricter rules about where parts for cars and metals come from. They want to align customs across the continent to counter China's influence. They're pushing for stronger labor rules, and they want more access to protected markets in Canada and Mexico, like dairy and energy. But here's the really crucial takeaway. If you add all this up, the goal seems to be to turn the USMCA from just a trade deal into a much broader regional security pact. So, what's the response from the other side of the table? Well, in a really smart strategic move, Canada and Mexico are not going it alone. They are teaming up. They've launched this joint action plan to make sure their positions are aligned so they can present a unified front. The goal here is pretty clear. Avoid getting divided and conquered in separate talks with the US.
Okay, but here's the puzzle. There's a huge political problem. To formally reopen and change the entire treaty, you'd need a vote in the US Congress. And pretty much everyone agrees that's a non-starter right now. So the question becomes, how do you update a massive trade deal when you can't actually reopen it? Well, it turns out diplomats are getting very creative.
And one of the most interesting ideas on the table is something called a side letter. Think of it like a legal add-on or an appendix to the main treaty. These are binding legal agreements, but they let you update or clarify things without having to crack open the whole text for a new vote. So you could use a side letter to modernize the deal for things like AI, critical minerals, or digital trade, all without the political headache of a full re-ratification. And the creative thinking doesn't stop there. People aren't just talking about updating the old rules, they're brainstorming brand new institutions. Things like a permanent regional supply chain security group to map out vulnerabilities and trace goods coming from China, or a North American Energy Business Council to get everyone on the same page with regulations. Even an idea for a coordinated system to review foreign investments for any regional security risks. These are big, forward-looking ideas. So when you take a step back and look at this whole complex chess match, where does it all lead? What does the future of North American trade look like? Well, it seems to be boiling down to 3 possible outcomes. Okay, scenario 1 is a trilateral extension. This is probably the most likely path. The deal gets renewed for another 16 years, but Canada and Mexico have to give up some ground. Scenario 2 is what's being called a slow-motion termination. This is what happens if they can't reach a deal. The pact would then face uncertain annual reviews for a decade, which would just be poison for business investment. And then there's Scenario 3, the bilateral pivot. This is the nuclear option, where the U.S. just walks away from the 3-country deal and tries to cut separate deals with Canada and Mexico individually. That would be hugely disruptive and create a real mess.
And all of this really brings us to the biggest question of all, the one that these next few months will answer. Is North America building a competitive fortress, a unified economic bloc that can take on the rest of the world? Or is it building a protectionist cage, one that ends up trapping us with higher costs and less innovation? It's a huge question, and the clock is ticking.